Thank you for tuning back in again. Here is the final of 3 parts to the screencast reading for the textbook reading and key concept questions on the Han dynasties of China. Let's go ahead and finish. The Han unifies Chinese culture. So as the Han Empire expanded its trade networks, the Chinese began to learn about the foods and the fashions common in foreign lands. Similarly, expanding the empire through conquest brought people of different cultures under Chinese rule. Unification under Chinese rule. To unify the empire, the Chinese government encouraged assimilation, which is the process of making conquered peoples part of Chinese culture. To promote assimilation, the government sent Chinese farmers to settle newly colonized areas. It also encouraged them to intermarry with local peoples. So government officials set up schools to train local people in the Confucian philosophy, and then appointed local scholars to government posts. Several writers also helped unify Chinese culture by recording China's history. Sima Xian, who lived from 145 to 85 BC, is called the Grand Historian from his work in compiling a history of China from ancient dynasties to Wudi. To write accurately, Sima Xian visited historical sites, interviewed eyewitnesses, researched official records, and examined artifacts. His book is called Records of the Grand Historian, and another famous book was the history of the former Han dynasty. Bian Biao, who lived from AD 3 to 54, started the project, and after his death, his son, Yang Bu, and later his daughter, Zhang Jiao, worked on it too. And Bian Jiao had also wrote a guide called Lessons for Women, which called upon women to be humble and obedient, but also industrious. Women's roles, wives, nuns, and scholars. Although Bian Jiao gained fame as a historian, most women during the Han dynasty led quiet lives at home. Confucian teachings had dictated that women were to devote themselves to their families. However, women made important contributions to their family's economic life through duties and the home and work in the fields of the family farm. Some upper-class women lived in much different lives. As explained earlier, a few empresses wielded great power. Taoist and later Buddhist nuns were able to gain an education and lead lives apart from their families. Women in aristocratic and land-owning families also sometimes pursued education and culture. Some women ran small shops, and still others practiced medicine. Let's move on to the last section here. The fall of the Han dynasty and their return. In spite of economic and cultural advances, the Han emperors faced grave problems. One of the main problems was an economic imbalance caused by customs that allowed the rich to gain more wealth at the expense of the poor. The rich take advantage of the poor. According to custom, a family's land was divided equally among all the father's male heirs. Unless a farmer could afford to buy more land during his lifetime, each generation inherited smaller plots, which such small plots of land, farmers had a hard time raising enough food to sell or even to feed the family. Because of this, small farmers often went into debt and had to borrow money from large landowners, who charged very high interest rates. If the farmer couldn't pay back the debt, the landowner took possession of the farmer's land. Large landowners were not required to pay taxes, so when their land holdings increased, the amount of land that was left for the government to tax decreased. With less money coming in, the government pressed harder to collect money from the small farmers. So as a result, the gap between rich and poor actually increased. Wang Mang overthrows the Han, and during this time of economic change, political instability grew. At the palace, court advisors, palace servants, and rival influential families wove complex plots to influence the emperor's choice of who would succeed him as a ruler. From about 32 BC until AD 9, one inexperienced emperor replaced another, chaos reigned in the palace, and with peasant revolts, unrest spread across the land as well. Finally, Wang Mang, a Confucian scholar and member of the court, decided that a strong ruler was needed to restore order. For 6 years, he had been acting as a regent for the infant who has been crowned emperor, and in AD 9, Wang Mang took the imperial title for himself and overthrew the Han, thus ending the former Han dynasty and the first half of the Han dynasty. Wang Mang tried to bring the country under control. He minted new money to relieve the treasury shortage and set up public granaries that helped feed China's poor. Wang Mang also took away large landholdings from the rich and planned to redistribute the land to farmers who had lost their land. But this plan angered powerful landowners, and Wang Mang's larger supply of money disrupted the economic ability of the country to function, because it allowed people to increase their spending, which encouraged merchants to raise prices. Then in AD 11, a great flood left thousands dead and millions homeless. The public granaries did not hold enough to feed the displaced, starving people, and huge peasant revolts rocked the land. The wealthy opposed Wang Mang's land policies and joined in the rebellion, and the rebels assaulted Wang Mang in AD 23. Within 2 years, a member of the old imperial family took the throne and began the second period of the Han rule, called the Later Han. The Later Han years. With peace restored to China, the first decades of the later Han dynasty were quite prosperous. The government sent soldiers and merchants westward to regain control of posts along the Silk Roads, but this expansion could not make up for the social, political, and economic weaknesses within the empire itself. Within a century, China suffered from the same economic imbalances, political intrigues, and social unrest that had toppled the former Han. By 220, the latter Han dynasty had disintegrated into three rival kingdoms. In the next chapter, you will learn about the early civilization kingdoms that developed in Africa. So as you guys can see, China under the Han was definitely unique, complex, and diverse, and these characteristics of culture and history both combine to show us how China developed early on into be a formidable force in world history. Thank you very much for tuning in, and good luck with completing the rest of the lesson.